Oh my God, we're
Okay,
recording.
we're recording.
Everyone,
Hello.
welcome to the meeting, even though none of you are here.
Except
We're
one,
supposed to have
one super nice person who. Oh,
my God.
oh my God! Wait, we got someone.
Who's this?
Okay.
Hi.
Hello, new person.
Sorry, we just started the meeting, but now we have people. Welcome. Good to see you.
Hi.
Yeah, we need a change the schedule because no one can
Yeah.
come to this
Everyone was
meeting.
in classes.
So,
Anyways.
anyways,
So for the people who are watching this at home asynchronously, shout out to Akash for logging in with the Zoom and allowing us to record because he's the real MVP.
yeah.
Anyways, so let's get started. Today we're gonna vote.
Hold on. This is Ethan.
Yeah, hi, I'm Ethan.
This is Steven. I'm Erwin. Self-introductions out of the way.
We're gonna vote at the end for our new logo, just a little bit of teaser, but right now we're gonna talk about just some very basic stuff about photography in general and film photography specifically, just like if you've never ever done this before, which I know a bunch of you haven't. So just some basic information so you don't have to go Googling all of this stuff all over the place, like I'm sure a lot of us have done in the past. Anyways, so first up, we're going to give you a little quick, like 5-minute, actually, can you hear me in my backpack? Cool. We're gonna do like a 5-minute just guide to like the basic types of cameras and like the pros and cons of each one. So the first type of camera, if you can hand me this one, is called a single lens reflex or like an SLR camera. This is mine. This is a Nikon F2. Basically what this means is this type of camera, there is actually, if you take the lens off, which I'm failing to do right now for some reason, come on. So there's like literally, if you look in it, there's a mirror in here. So you're literally, when you look through the lens, you are looking exactly through, or if you look through the camera, you're looking through the lens. So these cameras also have interchangeable lenses, which is a great thing. So if you don't like the lens that's on your camera, you could buy a new one. And get the use out of that. This also makes it great for portrait photography where like precise composition is essential. Anything you guys would like to add?
No.
Okay.
The thing is, you have to keep a little slightly higher shutter speed because the mirror slapping shakes the camera a little bit if you're in lower light.
Right. Yeah. And especially if you're using a tripod as well.
However, in general, these are, very basic, very controllable, and usually pretty cheap.
Yeah.
So they're great for starting out.
Yeah. For a little bit more advanced, you have rangefinders like this here, like an M6. These are a little bit more difficult to shoot, mainly because of the fact that you're not actually looking through the lens. Usually there's a little window like right here to the side that you look through, and you actually have a rangefinder where you kind of have to light it up in camera. As I said, these are a little bit more hard to get used to. Once you get used to it, there are a number of advantages.
It's really fast to focus with.
Exactly.
And it's easier to focus in low light in some cases because you're looking through a bright viewfinder instead of through a lens, which sometimes does not let in enough light. Also, it is a little beneficial for people who are wearing eyeglasses because you don't need relief. It focuses by matching a little square image over a big square image. And, looking at that is sometimes a little bit easier than trying to know exact focus with glasses. So if you have glasses, keep in mind that could be a good option too.
Right.
To Erwin's point about focusing in lower light, if you're using the flash and on an SLR, you have to usually put it at a pretty high f-stop. It's hard to see through the lens when it's so closed down. So if you have a flash and you're not looking through the lens like in a rangefinder, it helps a lot.
All right. And then last but not least, definitely the budget option on this list is the point and shoot. These, well, yeah, not necessarily budget for y'all, you Contax T2 fans out there. But generally, these are going to be the easiest type of cameras to use. This is just a little like Vivitar. I don't even know. This one, it doesn't even have controls on it. So
literally,
yeah,
it, shoot
you
it.
literally just like point and click. I mean, if that's had batteries in it. But this is definitely like a more like casual option. As I said, like you don't have really any control over the photos. But like if you're just looking at something to like take to parties and like take pictures of your friends, this is definitely the route to go. And now on to some of our recommendations for these three types of cameras. Everything that we put on this list is generally like under $150, which is kind of like a good price of entry, we think. So like stuff like the Nikon FM and FE, the Canon AE1, all these other stuff. I put emphasis on the Nikon and the Canons because these are camera systems that have like a huge array of lenses. You can find them everywhere, and for the most part, as long as you're not getting into like some of like the super like low f-stop like professional glass, it's pretty affordable. For the rangefinder, the Olympus XA is a great one. I've had a couple of those. They're super small, you can fit them in a pocket. And it's almost kind of like a hybrid between the rangefinder and the point and shoot. And then the Canon X2L17, I know a bunch of friends who have had those. They have a very sharp 40mm lens, which is great. And then you have point and shoots, Nikon, Canon. There's a lot of stuff. You can usually sometimes like find these in bargain bins at thrift shops, which is, I'm sure, like a bunch of people here have gotten point and shoots from that. And speaking of great places to find cameras, if you're looking for a specific one, eBay is great. There are a number of like buy-sell groups that are specifically for analog cameras on Facebook. So just kind of being in those and like being on the lookout for good deals and such. And also the photo market subreddit is another great place to look. Generally, when buying cameras, you always want to like check the condition, ask if it's had like a recent service or if the light seals have been replaced, particularly because like a camera that's going on 50 years old with the original light seals is probably not going to be the best thing. And if you ever need help finding a camera or you want to ask questions, you can DM any of us in Discord and we will be sure to help you out.
Another thing is that what's cool about buying a Nikon or Canon film camera is that if you have a digital version of one of those, a lot of the lenses are compatible with the film cameras.
And especially if you're someone who already has a digital camera, the kind of like how these cameras go is like the ones from kind of like the 70s and the early 80s are the ones you classically associate with being film cameras. But then once they kind of got into the 90s, a lot of those are a ton cheaper. They actually have a lot more features because that was right when they were transitioning to digital. And these those bodies from the 90s usually work a lot better with the modern lenses. So if you have modern lenses, some of those like 90s cameras are definitely a bargain if you are getting into shooting film. Thank you for that point, Stephen. Or anything?
No.
Okay.
Board.
All right, moving on to films.
What's the difference between DSLR and SLR?
Basically,
these things for digital.
yeah, exactly.
Yeah,
So just a single lens reflex, either the DSLR is digital, SLR, I mean, it can be digital, can be film, but usually in our case, we're referring to something that's film. So basically, the only difference is how your pictures are actually taken.
Yeah. So like basically, Erwin, were you handing me that camera real quick? Where it went?
The only difference is that instead on a DSLR, instead of film, there's the digital sensor.
Yeah,
It's
like
both
where
of
the
them
film
use
is.
the mirror. Yeah.
So it's like basically the same mechanics except for the digital sensor. Okay, thank you for that question, because that's an excellent question. So now we're going on to the film guide, which makes me cry a little bit because recent Kodak price increase. God help us all. Question for the group: what's your current favorite film?
Ektachrome.
Yeah, we knew that. Steven.
I'm a sucker for Portrait 800. I know it's basic, but
Cool.
always gets the job done.
All right, Akash.
Okay, so it's an Indian movie.
Uh-huh.
It's called Rockstar.
Oh,
Really?
Yeah, so it's an old movie, like 5-7 years, but
No, we're talking
Oh.
about cameras, not
We're talking
movies.
about-
oh, I'm
Don't worry.
I don't know.
No, it's okay.
Okay.
You'll find your own
Yeah.
Okay.
one day.
My favorite's Tri-X. It makes me cry. That's $11 a roll. Anyways, getting into it. So there are three main types of films. Color negative, which is like what most people you see will be using. So it's funny that I put somewhat expensive on it because it used to be really cheap. It used to be like $3 or $5 a roll. Now it's up to like 10.
15.
Yeah, unfortunately.
Unfortunately.
Cine's still looking mad cheap these days.
Yeah.
the good thing about color negative film is it's very tolerant to overexposure. I'm sure you've seen like all the YouTubers exposing Portra 400 or like 100. Steven says no. And it's also decently tolerant to underexposure. So if you're, starting out and you like are having a little bit of trouble with exposure, most color negative films will save your butt just a little bit. Or you want to talk about black and
Moving on,
white?
let's talk about black and white negative. So again, it's a negative, so you have to scan it, or you can print it in the darkroom, but that's a more advanced thing.
Yeah, we'll be talking about that
later.
soon.
This is what you consider kind of the classic vintage photos, those black and white photos. There are many different stocks. Tons of companies make them because they're also relatively easy to make. So there's a lot of options. Each of them have a little bit of their distinctive style. They are very tolerant to overexposure and decently tolerant to underexposure. And they come in a lot of different ISOs, which is the sensitivity of film.
Right.
We will talk about that a bit later too. So yeah, there's a great range to start with of options, and it's generally pretty cheap too. You can also develop it yourself. That's also something for later. So it's great to start with if you're just trying to get into it and start shooting.
Okay. Thank you. Sorry, Stephen, you want to talk about slide film?
Slide film has less dynamic range than a negative film, like color and black and white, which means that you have like a smaller window of error. Like if you overexpose it, it's going to be not that great, and same with underexposure. But what's cool about it is that the colors are way more vivid, and when you develop them, you can see the pictures instead of having to, be the opposite negative image. Oh, are you going to talk about like development costs?
I know I wasn't, but let's get into
one
that right
thing
now.
worth mentioning is that although color negative film these days is more expensive per roll, usually it's cheaper to develop it at a lab. And black and white is usually a little bit extra, even though the film is cheaper. So that might be something to consider. Positive film, expensive, more expensive usually on both ends. Though if you're developing at home, color negative does require a little bit more infrastructure and chemistry than black and white.
This is a great thing to talk about for another day. If you have any questions about home developing, you can come to us, and we'll probably have another one of these at some point to talk about how to develop at home.
Yeah, because it's fun and you should all do it.
And it's cheap.
Anyways, so now on to our specific recommendations. It's hard to recommend color negative film these days. Everything is very expensive. But we put Kodak Gold and Ultramax because those used to be like $5 a roll. Now they're like 10, which but Fuji has stayed pretty steady. So like Fuji Superior is a great option, a great budget option. Black and white is kind of like the most accessible price point in like film right now. So a lot of the kind of cheaper stuff like Fomapen 200, Kentmere 400, well, really anything from Fomapen, Kentmere, like Arista EDU, all these companies is a great way to like start shooting film for cheap. Those are usually like really like $6 and under. HP5 is about $8, but like everybody and their mother shoots HP5. And it's also great to buy in a bulk roll, which is another thing we're going to be talking about other days. And then slide film, pretty much the only ones that get made anymore are Ektachrome, which is somebody's favorite, as well as Fuji has Velvia and Provia. Oh, and the other thing that we didn't talk about is color negative film is usually anywhere from 100 to 400 ISO. Black and white film really goes from anywhere from like 50 to 3200 ISO. And slide film is usually only 100 or in some cases 50 ISO, although they might have discontinued Velvia 50.
One film will be having a constant ISO, right?
Yeah.
There's some weird ones, but
we'll
talk about that later.
Yeah.
Generally, for starters, you want to shoot at whatever they recommend you to shoot at the quote-unquote box speed that they put on the box.
Yeah. So like, if you look at your camera, there's usually somewhere on it, like on this Nikon F2, there's like a dial right here, and that basically tells the meter in your camera. Thanks for blocking my face, Erwin.
That's
There's it tells the like electronics in your camera what film is in it, and that in turn allows you to get a correct exposure when you're out shooting. So as to where to buy this stuff, there's really a lot of options locally, depending on where you live in New York City. If you're in New York City, places like Color House, which is our favorite, as well as like Wester,
Bleecker.
Bleecker, they all have pretty good stocks. If you want to journey uptown and get your mind blown by all the gear, Adorama and B&H are a great resource, as well as online sites like Freestar Moment. But no matter where you buy, you should always compare prices, because some places might be having a deal or not. And let's be honest, we're trying to get the stuff as cheap as possible. We're all college students here. So that's a great recommendation.
I will mention,
Yes.
usually Color House's color film is about $1 or $2 cheaper per roll compared to most online sources when there's no promotions running. So
Right.
if you want color film, that's probably where you should check first.
Yeah. And then other tip, just before we move on, a lot of the films, especially the consumer films like Gold, Ultramax, and Superior, will come in 24 as well as 36 exposure rolls. If you see a film that's a little bit cheaper, that's probably why. So always make sure you buy the 36 exposure rather than the 24, just to get the most bang for your buck, really. All right. Next up, we're going to talk about understanding lenses, because this is like something that I struggled with when I was starting photography, because you look at a lens and it has all these like weird markings on it and you have no idea what they mean. So we're going to take a second and decipher a little bit of that. So first up is focal length. Erwin, you want to take this one?
Okay, so they're often written as however many millimeters. Sometimes they're marked as however many centimeters, but either way, do the conversion. So this determines how wide or narrow the field of view is for your lens. So 24 millimeters and under, or wider, as we say, will be considered super wide or ultra wide. 24 to 35 is your general wide. 40 to 58 usually we'll consider to be normal. We'll talk about what normal means a bit later. 75 to 135 is telephoto. Longer than 135 is super telephoto. So mostly what this changes right now is how narrow your view is. So wide you see more, tele you see less, but it also changes something called compression. So if you look at the image that's on screen right now, you'll see that when you keep the subject the same size, with a longer lens, it brings the background closer in, because it's cropping to only that much. That's something you might want to think about a little bit later down the road, because that's how you get some really interesting images, especially with cityscapes or with portraits. But in general, right now, just consider them as how wide your field of view is.
Right. Okay. Thank you for that, Erwin. Stephen, do you want to take f/aperture?
Sure. So this one's a little confusing because the smaller the number, the bigger the opening in your lens is here. So this is my 50 millimeter lens. So it's a normal lens. So this is as wide open, like the f-stop. It's f2, which is like most lenses are like the widest aperture is f2. Oh yeah, and when you buy a lens, it's going to be the widest aperture it can go with the focal length. So this is a 50 millimeter f2. But then as the number goes up, let's go to f8. The hole gets smaller. So opening it wider, but that is number 22, and there's like a tiny little pinhole. So what that does in terms of your images, the wider the aperture, the more light gets let in every time you take the photo, but you get lower depth of field. So this image of Brendan over here has a relatively low depth of field. So that means that the aperture was a little opened up. But if you were to close it down, make a tiny little pinhole, the building in the background could be in focus. Yeah, so if you're in low light conditions, you'd want to open it up, but that makes it harder to get what you want, the subject you want in focus, because it gets a really narrow depth of field. So if you're taking a portrait, it might be nice to have the aperture really open. And if you're taking like a landscape, you might want to stop it down to like a higher number so you get way more in focus and everything's sharp.
Okay, thank you, Stephen, for that explanation. And last up, we're just going to talk about like zoom lenses versus prime lenses. So basically, like the zoom lens is just what it describes. So I've got one right here. Is literally when you give it a little twist. This is a, what is this? An 18 to 135. So usually when you have a zoom lens, like the focal length will be listed, it'll be like 18-55 or 70-200. And that basically means like the widest to the narrowest it can go. So this is a pretty cheap one. I don't know how much it costs. This was for my digital camera, but generally at the same price point, the prime lenses are going to be like a lot more higher quality, and they're also usually going to have a wider maximum aperture. But this is also, zoom lenses are prized for their versatility, which is why you see them on a lot of like digital camera kits. And this is compared to like a prime lens like this one, where like this one is anywhere from 18 millimeters all the way to 135 millimeters. And this is just a 28 millimeter. So,
And I'm just gonna quickly talk about the pictures on screen here right now. So on the left, it's a zoom lens, and you can see it says 16, 18, 21. That is its zoom range. It zooms from 16 millimeters to 21 millimeters. And you know, there's a center option of 18. If you have a zoom lens yourself, like if you see this one, it marks actually 18, 24, 35, all those numbers. Up here is your aperture ring. And here we see a prime where, you know, since it doesn't zoom, there's no zoom ring, there's just a focus ring and a aperture ring. But most lenses will mark their focal length on either the lens barrel, which is like the side here, and definitely the front. So you can see here it's a f2 50 millimeter. So, you know, that's also a great place to learn about your lens.
right. All right. So as to what we recommend for like a first like budget, like starting lens, a 50 millimeter prime lens with an aperture anywhere between f1.4 and f2 is a great starting point. I'm pretty sure Erwin's going to talk about what a normal lens is in a minute, but 50 millimeters is what we would call a normal lens. And when you're buying like, you know, your first, let's say SLR camera, it is usually going to have a 50 millimeter lens attached to it if it has a lens at all. So do you want to talk about what having a normal lens means?
So think about this. I'm staring at the computer screen right now, and how much I see when I stare at this, like the area where I'm most focused on is right around the imaging area of a 50 millimeter. And also the 50 millimeter, as we talked about with compression, you know, you can, it might be drastic or one way or another. 50 millimeter, it feels pretty natural. It feels neutral. It feels like you're just looking at the object as is. That's why 50 millimeters are considered normals, because they really, in a lot of ways, they give you an image that you feel natural to your eye. And there are also some of the cheapest, easiest to design, especially for back in the days. So that's why there's a lot of 50 millimeter lenses around. They're usually, back in the days of film, they're usually sold as the kit lens that comes with the camera. So that's why we recommend 50 millimeter lenses as the lens to buy, because it's usually cheap, high quality, and it feels natural to you,
Right.
most people.
And if you're looking for a second lens, we really recommend getting like a wider lens, like a 35 or a 28. Most of the main cameras that I use have 28s on them. I do love that focal length. It's great for street photography, which is what I primarily use it for, as well as landscape photography and environmental portraits as well, when you're trying to get a little bit more context to your image. Okay, now, this is what the kids call the exposure triangle. And this basically is a three-way slider that will ensure that you take photos that are properly exposed. Like as we said earlier when we were talking about films, some films are going to have a little bit more wiggle room on this scale than others. But the easy thing about shooting film is the bottom leg, I guess, of the triangle, which is your ISO, is going to be constant, because you can't switch your ISO in the middle of a roll unless you want all your photos to be either white or black. Erwin, you want to talk about like what aperture does?
Okay, so aperture considers how much light you're letting in. Can I see the 50 again? So think about aperture as of how much light is letting to a lens at once. If you open it wide, you can see a lot of light coming through all this once. But if you close it down, you only let in a little bit of light at once. And pair that with shutter speed, which is how long you let light in for. You're gonna just want to balance the two numbers to fit. So let's say you want let's say a number 0. If you have +5 on one side, you want -5 on the other side for it to reach that 0. And this is basically what aperture and shutter speed does. You want to let in just the right amount of light to get your image properly exposed.
Right. Because basically like how film works is there's only one amount of light that is going to give you a perfectly exposed image at a given ISO. So what you're doing by manipulating the aperture and the shutter speed is you are just finding the particular combination that allows you to have that perfect amount of light. And what you might want to have a wide open aperture, let's say if you're taking a portrait, and that would require you to have a really fast shutter speed. Or if you want to have a lot of motion blur in your photo, like let's say you're at, an 1/8 of a second or a 1/16 of a second, you're going to have a really closed down aperture in order to have that photo come out properly exposed. So that's just a little bit like 5-minute explanation of the exposure
We
triangle.
swear it's easier once you start doing it. And
It
if
is.
we're, in person and actually taking photos, but,
How to set the ISO like that's
Yeah, so like usually like when you buy a film like that, there will be a big number on the box and that's usually the ISO. And so on most cameras, there will be a dial, like there's this one on this one, or like right here, where you can set the ISO.
according to the film.
Yes,
So I have a DSLR, so it doesn't need a film, right?
right.
Yeah,
So-
DSLR, you can, like with this one, you can change it any shot you want, and it doesn't have to be fixed. But with film, usually you want to keep it the
Oh.
same for the entire roll.
Okay.
Yeah.
That's one of the upsides of, or downsides, depending on how you look at it, of
Yeah.
digital.
All right, thanks for that question.
And just one more, like how does, like for example, I said 800 ISO, like how do you decide what number to keep with?
Oh, the higher the ISO, the more light sensitivity. The ISO is just how sensitive the sensor, like the film or the digital sensor, is to light. So the bigger the number, the more light is going to be shown, but at the downside of more noise. So if you're at 800 ISO, it's going to be a little noisier than 400, 200, but you'll get a proper exposure if there's less light available.
Right, so like usually, if you're in broad daylight, anywhere from like ISO 1 to really like ISO 400 is a good starting point. Like low light, you want to think about maybe getting a film that's, anywhere from like 400 to 1600. And if you're shooting at night, you want to think about having a film that's maybe like 3200 ISO or even pushing that to like 6400.
Which is crazy.
Yeah, which is crazy, and only crazy people do that. Anyways, so moving on. Yeah,
Don't act like none of all three of us.
Yeah,
We've
we've
exposed to 12,800, 12,800.
Oh my God.
Yeah, we've all done
That's
that.
wild.
yeah,
Don't worry about it.
don't do pushing
Not-
film,
not a good
kids.
idea.
Yeah,
Um,
that's
just
for
say
another
no.
day.
Yeah, just say no to pushing film. Anyways, now we're just gonna have like a candid little talk about some compositional techniques. I've put some like rather famous photos in the next couple slides, and we're just gonna like talk about them, tell you what we see in them, and hopefully you can use some of the concepts that we're gonna talk about to apply to your own photography, because it can be a little bit hard to recognize these just like in the moment, but once you actually look at an image, it's a lot easier to like parse things out. So first one is the Afghan girl, sometimes called like the most famous photo in the world. Rest in peace, Kodachrome. One thing that immediately jumps out to you that we've been talking about kind of the whole time is when you're taking a portrait, you want a really shallow depth of field. So if you look, like everything in her face is in focus, which is what you want. I think when you're taking a portrait, you want the eyes in focus.
Yeah.
I believe is a general rule. If you look at like this, her arm back here, it's like slightly out of focus, and then everything behind her is like super, super out of focus. Or anyone jump in?
Yeah, so when you look at compositionally, the first thing you see that her face is basically in the center of the screen. So if we draw a line here, you know, from her eye down to her chin, it basically takes up the center 1/3. And if you draw the vertical lines, that her face takes up about also the center 1/3. So this is a very classic central composition. You're placing her in the middle of the image, but there's also a little bit of what's the golden ratio? Is what it's called.
Yeah.
Because if we're gonna draw that, it basically swings out this way. So it's a really, really cleverly composed image, especially with how her garment twists.
Right. And the other thing,
Golden ratio.
Golden ratio.
yeah, just like the Fibonacci spiral, I think it's called. Because you can kind of see it like where you start on her eyes and then it kind of spirals out to like her hair and her clothes down here. The other thing is this is shot on a slide film or a color positive film called Kodachrome. It was very famous. Paul Simon wrote a song about it even.
It's a movie about it.
Yeah, there's a movie about it.
That sucks.
Needless to say, Kodachrome is not around anymore. They stopped making it about 2009 and they stopped processing it shortly after that.
But the lens is still available. It's the Nikon 105 2.8.
Yes. I think it's actually a
2.5.
2.5? Okay.
All right, get wrecked. Anyways, yeah, I've actually been looking for one of those.
I have a lot of them in the apartment.
They do?
Yeah.
Okay, anyways, we're getting off topic.
Off topic.
But basically, this is a telephoto lens with a very wide aperture. And also this is slide film, so you can see these colors are super, super bright and saturated and punchy.
Compositional techniques.
Yeah, well, I'm just saying like this is the things that go behind the image. And then also, you know, your eye looks to different colors. So like there's a lot of red in this image and there's also a lot of green and that kind of draws your eye in as well. Any last parting thoughts with Afghan Girl?
People with light eyes make good photos. Because
Yes.
you can see their eyes very well.
Correct. All right, moving on.
That's
Yes, thank you.
I think
Moving
it's
on.
practical advice.
Yeah, moving on to this image, which is by the very famous street photographer. Yeah, Cartier-Bresson. This image is a great example of leading lines. So basically leading lines are any kind of lines that kind of point you towards the subject in an image. So like the subject here is this bicyclist. So you have like this line of the pavement kind of pointing from this side of the frame to the cyclist head. And as well, you have these kind of stair railings that are kind of curving around and pointing towards the cyclist. Anything you'd like to add?
Also, if you look at this line, this is about, I want to say about the center of the image. And when you draw this line up, this goes to about the corner. And when you have this line draws in and joins this line over here. And this shape versus this human shape. And let's say this is around center-ish of the image. There's just, so two of the main things we consider when taking images is either putting an element or a leading line from the center of the image or from a third of the image. And this has a lot of that. Like this, I want to say is about a third. This is central. This is about central-ish. So all these lines together just build the composition. A composition is not just where something's placed, it's about every single element, every single line in there.
Right.
And also this one shows the stillness versus the motion. You can see that the cyclist is clearly moving, just a little bit, but moving. So that gives a sense of dynamism, which builds further onto the lines, which are already dynamic.
Slow shutter speed is how you would get this kind of like slightly blurred effect. I would think like what, maybe the 60th, the 30th of a
30th.
second, something like that. Stephen, anything to add?
Like this is all really overwhelming, and that's why Henry Cartier-Bresson is like a master of trade. Like I bet not even he was thinking about all like the lines going. I'm sure like afterwards he thought this is amazing. But practically what to think about is where the viewer's eye is drawn to in the frame, which is way more intuitive than you'd think with all like the line, the shadow, the shape, like talking about it in like art analytical terms. Just thinking about where is my eye going when I look at a photo or when I'm framing a photo when I'm about to take it is usually, I think, is like a better rule of thumb.
Right.
Let's be very honest. When you're taking a photo, you're not thinking that much. But what we're trying to do here is tell you why afterwards, when you look at this photo, we think it's great. You want to really just look at these images, study them, like understand why they're so great, like in a technical way. And the more you look at them, the more it kind of builds into your subconscious. So when you take photos, the more you do it, the better you get at it. And at some point, you realize that you're doing these things without even thinking about it, and that's the best place you want to be.
Yeah, exactly. Practice makes perfect in photography. I will say that. Okay, I believe this might be the last one. This is another
Bresson.
Yeah, this is another Bresson. I believe this is from like Paris and maybe pre-war Paris. But this is a great example of what Bresson called like the decisive moment, which is basically he just sat there and wait for a picture to come to him, and when you see it, you take it. Like as you can see, like by the subject's foot, like it's like almost touching the water, but it's not breaking the surface, which gives it this kind of like weird, like dreamlike ethereal quality. And also the kind of symmetry that's drawn along the water with like, the sign being reflected, and also like the subject's body in the reflection, and these great like lines about, or I was saying earlier.
Yeah, so if you're looking at this is about a third, this is about a third, this is give or take about half, where this person is standing if we draw a line, and this also coincides with the back leg. All these elements, one time and time again, you'll see it happen. And the more you do it, the more you're gonna kind of subconsciously think about this. But if you're just starting out, you might want to as Bresson does, just sit there, build your composition and then wait for something to happen.
Good. Anything?
Oh, another thing is just negative space, which is like just having nothing is like a really powerful thing. I mean, in this photo, like the way that the photo is framed with just empty sky or reflection of sky helps guide the eye to the the little not touching the water moment.
Yeah, negative space is a huge one, like especially if you have like maybe a lot of stuff going on in like this side of the image and like only one thing going on in this side of the image. It really helps to like single out your subject, like we are against this lovely background right now. That's why we're such popping in your frame. Anyways, that was a terrible joke. Do we have any questions from the huge audience that we have here?
Two people.
That's my question.
Okay. Yeah, anyways, so that's our show. Thank you so much for everyone who's watching this after we recorded it. Yeah, and always, if you have any questions about anything we've said, please feel free to like contact us. You can post it in one of the channels in the Discord. You can DM any one of us. We'll be happy to like answer any questions you have, help you out.
If you're in the Discord, you see the members with the red name tags. That is the officers, quote unquote, of this club. That will be Ethan, me, Steven, and our friend Taylor, who's unfortunately not be able to make it.
Yeah.
So, just DM one of us if you have any questions.
Well, non-officers are also really helpful.
Yeah.
too.
Yeah.
I mean, we're not
we have
the
Brandon, Jen, they're all really talented
Everyone has
photographers.
something good to say.
Yeah. Also, like this club is, a great place to make friends as well. Like there are some super talented photographers in this club. Some of the officers are super talented, not me, but thank you. But yeah, there's a ton of super talented people in this club, a ton of great people, like just like DM people and ask to go shoot photographs with them. Like that's the best way to like, improve and network as a photographer, and like even casually. So yeah, with that, thank you all for coming. Thank you, Kurs, for saving us with the Zoom recording. Yeah, we'll see you guys at the next event. Thank you so much. All right. And now
We stop.
Stop recording.